Coming up on today's show, Jace C. Ryden is a queer, kinky, pansexual, poly-trans man who has made Arizona his home for over 20 years. He prides himself on being an outspoken advocate for transgender and civil rights, and as an out transgender man, has made it a point to use his powers for good, and has spoken publicly about his transition and his experiences as a member of the trans, poly, and kink communities. He's the co-creator of How to Be a Trans Ally and From Allies to Accomplices, Leaping into Action, which have been presented at numerous conferences and teaching opportunities since 2019. Jace is also an award-winning entertainer, MC, and producer, and is the co-host of Arizona's longest-running drag live stream, Let's Have a Fefe, which just wrapped up its 11th season. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up after the break, my conversation with Jace Ryden.
Are you bored with dick pics? Do random hookups and empty chats kill your vibe? Tired of being catfished or wasting time with messages from faceless profiles? Then you need to get Monogamish, a new dating app designed for singles and couples of all genders and sexualities looking for dates, mates, and everything in between. Access exclusive matchmaking events, workshops with dating and sexuality gurus, and exclusive offers so hot you'll just have to see for yourself. Download Monogamish for free from Google Play or the Apple App Store. Monogamish. Explore fluid relationships.
Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am excited to be here with Jace Ryden, who I had the pleasure of getting to meet when I attended their session at Southwest Love Fest this past year. And I believe that was April. Yeah, so I can't believe it's already June now. So great to have you here. Thank you for saying yes to coming on our show.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd love it if you, that's okay. I'd love it if you'd share about yourself in your own words for a couple minutes.
Absolutely. My name is Jace. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am, this is always a tricky one because what do you say? What do you not say? How much do you disclose? How much do you not disclose? So I am going to be 44 in just a couple of weeks. I am a trans man. I've been transitioning since 2014. And I'm going to tell you that male pattern baldness is a thing. My hair migrated from the top of my head south. So that was fun to wake up to. That was fun to wake up to. For the first, 35 years of my life, I identified as a lesbian. I guess I technically came out around 15 or so in high school, but I didn't know I had to come out, so it just was what it was until I kind of got in trouble for it. Fun fact, I was actually poly in high school, even though I didn't have a word for it. I had for, 2-3 years or so, I actually had a girlfriend and a boyfriend. They knew about each other and it was no big deal. I just didn't know what it was. And I didn't know that it wasn't normal. And I didn't, it was just one of those things. I grew up primarily in Southeast Asia for the first 18 years of my life. I've been exposed to all sorts of cultures and typhoid. That was exciting.
Wow.
It's been a wild ride, let me tell you. I graduated in Bangkok, moved to Hawaii for university, and I spent 2 years there. Well, I was there for 4 years, but 2 years of my life there, I was poly there as well. Again, didn't really have a word for it, but I was looking back on it now, I can say that I was a third in a relationship between my best friend and his wife, which I don't know that I was a unicorn per se, but I guess kind of. But I was still pretty much identifying as a lesbian, even though there was intimacy between myself and the husband. He was sort of the exception, not the rule. Mind you, this was back in the 90s when, you know, being bisexual wasn't really a thing. Girls who were bisexual were looked at as either greedy or, you know, they went to the bar, got drunk and liked to kiss girls. You know, you had to pick one. So I was a little more masculine presenting. So being a lesbian seemed to be what worked at the time. Yeah. I moved to Tucson, which is where I met my first out trans man, and began running in circles that had more sort of open polyamory. A lot of it was based in kink. A lot of it was, you know, open relationships, but it was definitely more open than what I'd been exposed to previously. Since then, oh God, I've been in Arizona now for about 20 years longer than I ever anticipated. But in that time, I've had multiple partners that have, sometimes my relationship have been monogamous, sometimes they've been poly. It all depends on the dynamic between myself and my partner at the time. I'm involved in the kink world. I'm involved in the leather world up here in Phoenix. I'm an entertainer, and through that, I'm actually able to kind of use that platform to educate and to inform. And I have my hands in a whole bunch of different fires. Like there's all sorts of stuff that I do.
Wow.
Currently, my partner and I, we are ethically non-monogamous. Although I keep practicing what I call armchair poly, where I'm a huge introvert, so meeting people is a little difficult for me. She's going on dates, she's doing all these things. I'm just like, cool, I'm gonna sit here and play Zelda, have fun, enjoy. I'll see you when you get home. Like you said, I was able to present at the Southwest Love Fest, which was another opportunity for me to do the How to Be a Trans Ally workshop, which was put together in 2019 because of the shady shit that was happening up here in Phoenix. But you know what? That's where some of the best things happen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for that overview. And I'd love to maybe go back a little bit in terms of since you sounded like you very early on realized that you were a lesbian at the time, and you also were practicing poly before you had the word. I love to ask this question of like, was there a light bulb moment when you were young, or like, when was it that you realized that you were going to be different than, say, the other kids? Like maybe when you were like, was it when you were really young? I always think that's an interesting question.
I knew that I was different in some way from very, very young. I remember having my first girl crush in kindergarten.
Oh, wow.
Like oh my God, I was so in love with this girl. I so in love with her. I also know, like, as far as sexuality, like that was a clue very early on. As far as gender identity, that was pretty early too. But again, I didn't know what it was. Like, I remember, running around as a kid without a shirt on, no big deal. And then I remember the day that my dad told me I had to start wearing a shirt. I was devastated. My first bike, I ended up crying because I wanted my friend had like this gray and silver, like black BMX style bike. And I was like, ooh, that's an awesome bike. So my first 2-wheel bike, I wanted something like that. And my dad got me this purple Huffy with a banana seat and a unicorn. I bawled. I was so upset. I was so upset. And not understanding why at the time. Now, of course, I'm like, oh yeah, you got me a fucking girl's bike. I didn't want a fucking girl's bike. I wanted a boy's bike, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So there were clues very, very early on regarding everything from sexuality to gender to you name it. Like, looking back, there were clues everywhere. My second grade school photo is me in a sweater vest, a button-up, and a tie. And if you look at it and you didn't know me, I would just look like a little boy with a slightly longer haircut. That was the last time my dad let me dress myself for school photos.
And how did your parents maybe take it when you let them know that you identified as a lesbian?
Not well. When I moved to Hawaii, my parents stayed, or my dad and my stepmom stayed in Bangkok. And I remember my dad sent me a letter with a little like Psalms booklet folded up inside. And it was something to the effect of, you know, make sure that you have lots of different friends so that what happened in Bangkok doesn't happen there. And I'm like, oh. I ended up writing a very long letter back to him that was like, look, I'm gay. Deal with it. Not about you. I don't care. He never, it was never talked about. It was never discussed. You know, my partners were always someone to split the bills with. They were never acknowledged. You know, if I was with somebody who had kids, that family dynamic was never acknowledged until I transitioned, interestingly enough.
Oh, wow.
When I first began my transition, I was with someone who I'd been with for 5 years, and she'd had two boys. Like, we lived together for quite some time. Mind you, the relationship deteriorated very quickly after that. But I remember my parents came out here probably 6 months or so after I started transitioning. I had already had my ID changed, my gender marker changed. I had already had all those things changed. And we were having dinner, and they look at my partner and they were like, welcome to the family. And I about lost it. I was like, she's been here. She's been here for 5 fucking years.
Wow.
Now all of a sudden it's okay. Like, now all of a sudden it was legitimate. So it was, I found that very interesting. I was like, oh, so you're not okay with me dating girls when I'm a girl, but, okay. I see how this, okay. It was very interesting.
Yeah, and I love that you're being so kind, saying it's interesting, because I'm sure that was also really difficult, I would imagine, for you to experience that.
It was, to an extent. I don't have a particularly close relationship with my parents, so where other people may have been absolutely devastated by that sort of thing, and I know people that have been devastated by the reaction of their parents, I was more like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is, I found it almost comical. I was like, are you, okay. If we had been closer, I think that the outcome might have been a little bit different, but because of the strained and slightly estranged relationship that I have with my dad and my stepmom, it was more just like a what the fuck.
I got you. And I can definitely appreciate that and relate to that. Even in my own life, there's a family member that I'm estranged to. And so it does kind of change the dynamic or the amount that it might, hurt your heart, in that moment. But thank you for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of people will relate to that. And another thing I'd love to maybe tease out or understand a little bit better is, we talked about the light bulb moment when you were really young. And that's, I think, fascinating and interesting to hear. Because like for me, I didn't realize I was polyamorous until I was about 38 years old, a different way of understanding who we are. But it was very different. And, but so for you, when you realized that you when you decided that you wanted to transition, was there, and you mentioned that you met your first person who had transitioned, I forget what the year you said, but was there a light bulb moment for you there where you're like, this is the next step on my journey. This feels right. Like, how was that moment that you had?
So growing up in Southeast Asia and spending a good chunk of my formative years in Bangkok, I was very familiar with the trans community as far as trans women, so that wasn't anything new to me. I would meet lady boys and things all the time. I would have, my dad, I remember taking us to a cabaret called Alcazar, I believe, where the entire cast were ladyboys and trans women. So that was no big deal to me. I didn't realize that the opposite could also be a thing. So when I met my first out trans man, there was a sort of a poof kind of thing that happens, light bulb. And I'm like, oh. But even then, it still took me almost a decade to actually take the steps to transition. And the reason for that is primarily unsupportive partners.
Okay.
And, it would be one of these things where I wouldn't even necessarily talk about it in terms of myself, but we would talk about, our friends that were transitioning, and the general consensus was, oh, I could never be with somebody who decided to do that. So it was probably a good 10 years before, after in a 6-month awful depression and knowing what it was that I needed. It was bad. It was terrible. It was 6 months of having zero sex drive, having no interest to do anything, not feeling comfortable in my own skin, just nothing was right. And I remember very clearly, I was sitting in bed with my partner, who our relationship was already kind of not so great at the time. But I remember sitting there and I looked at her and I said, so I'm going to go start therapy for transitioning. And she kind of looked at me and she was like, I said, I have to. I don't have a choice anymore. I have to. And that was, as soon as I said it, it was like a massive weight lifted off my shoulders. And things still weren't awesome. Like it's still a process, and there's still a lot of things that you have to go through. And there's things that people don't talk about when it comes to hormones and medically transitioning and things like that. There's things that people just nobody talks about it. So some of those things were like, oh, Jesus, what the fuck is happening? But even with dealing with all of that, it was still so much better. And even my friends who had known me for years were like, you are a completely different person. You are happy. You are, and honestly, I say this all the time when talking to people, regardless of what it is that they're toying over or what it is they're agonizing over. It's like, look, the second you make the decision to live authentically, whatever that means to you, you will feel better. Instantly, instantly. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's coming out as, a lesbian or as gay or as, bi or pan or poly or kinky or whatever it is. The second you decide that this is going to be part of your life, it's a game changer. It is 100% a game changer.
Thank you for sharing that. That was really heartfelt. I got goosebumps when you were sharing all of that so beautifully. And interestingly enough, when I told you that I didn't realize that I was polyamorous or kind of step into that identity till I was 38 years old. And interestingly, I also suffered through depression before that. And it was partly because my partner, my husband and I found out we were infertile, and I thought I was supposed to be a mother, all these things that you're supposed to be. Right. And so I had to go to that dark cave of going to face your fears. And when I came out the other side, I realized that I was a polyamorous queer woman and that I didn't really want to be a mother, especially if I couldn't have my own biological children, because people kept kind of pressuring me to adopt. And I was like, it just doesn't feel right. And so similar to you, which I think is so interesting to have this conversation, I love how you wrapped such a beautiful bow around that making that decision, which can be challenging. It takes courage, but to decide and get to that clarity of this is who I am. This is how I want to present to the world. This is what feels right to me. Whatever that is for you can, like you said, be a game changer and just feel so uplifting. It's hard to describe that feeling. You did a beautiful job of describing that. And I'm so glad that you were able to come on and share your story. Because what I think is so beautiful about sharing stories is, there's 8 billion people on the planet. So like each person might have their particular way that they are trying to figure out how to be authentic. And yours is another unique and beautiful story. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah. And I think one question I think I have from that is, you mentioned that whatever you're willing to share, some of the challenges in actually transitioning. Is there anything that you're willing to share that was maybe a surprise, or that if you'd known, maybe you would have thought twice, but you still would have done it? Anything like that?
So the weird hair growing in places, that was something new. I'd never been particularly hairy as a woman. That was never like, I rarely ever had to shave above my knees. It was, now all of a sudden I'm a beast. Like if I just let things go, it would all connect. Like all of it. It would just, everything from my ears to it would just all connect. That was a little like, oh, that was interesting. Learning to navigate white male privilege is actually something that I wasn't entirely aware of. And I actually use it now to educate, because privilege is a thing. And a lot of times you don't even realize that you have it. And, and learning to kind of adjust my own behavior, especially since I am often cis-assumed, or what people call passing. I hate that term. So I say cis-assumed. Because you look at me, you generally wouldn't know that I was trans. It's just what it is. But there are things that women do that, as a man, if I did the same thing, it's a little bit creepy. So, it's generally no big deal. You're at a bar or whatever, you're at a club, you see another woman who, you like their shoes, you think they look really good in their dress. You're like, oh my God, you are beautiful. No big deal. If I were to say that, it would immediately send up warning signals, and I know that because I've been on the other side of it, and at any time a man compliments you, it's an immediate, you go into that sort of defensive, what does he want kind of thing, and it's an immediate reaction because of this. It is what it is. So I I will say that even though I am cis-assumed, I'm not always straight assumed. In fact, I'm very rarely straight assumed. Most people assume that I'm a gay man. So I can get away with some of those things a little bit more than some of my more masculine counterparts. But it's still one of those things that I have to be mindful of depending on the situation. Things like walking behind a woman, if it's especially at night, if I'm walking somewhere and there's a woman that is also walking somewhere, I have to, I make it a point to either hang further back so that I'm not walking right behind her, or I speed up and pass and go on my merry way. Because I know what it feels like to be walking and having a guy behind you, and you're like, what is happening? Why is he behind me? Why is he walking behind me? Why is he, and again, it's just because that's what happens. It's just it's almost an instinctual thing, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. And the fact that, I am cis assumed and I am a white man, I am often in places where women aren't invited in, men's locker rooms, things like that. So I hear things that a lot of women aren't privy to. And it's been interesting because, when it comes to locker room talk, that's a thing. And men are awful. Like some of the things that they say, some of the things that, the way they talk about women. And, I have tried to make it a point, depending on what the situation is, to actually start calling other men out on that shit. Because, it's like, really, how would you feel if I talked about your sister like that? Well, then don't fucking talk about, don't. Like, don't be a dick. Like, it's really fucking easy. Don't be a dick. But I think that one of the issues is that a lot of cisgender men don't call out other cisgender men. They just, they don't think about it. But I've been on the other side. I know how it feels to be objectified in that way and to be concerned for my safety in that way. And, so I try to do my best when I can and when I feel it's an okay situation, because not all situations are safe, but when it's a good situation, to call the guys out on that shit. Like, no, you don't get to talk about, women like that if you're not okay with me talking about your mom or your sister like that. Like,
yeah, thank you. That was really insightful. Just all the different, because you have been on both sides, like you said, in multiple ways, just what you were able to observe. That's really interesting to know. I'd love to go back to something we were talking about earlier when you said that you and your partner are practicing ethical non-monogamy. And it sounded to me like you don't really feel hardly any jealousy. Is that right? When your partner's out on a date?
I generally don't know. That's something that I've worked on because I've had my life has been full of really shitty relationships. There's been, mental, physical, and emotional abuse. There have been all sorts of things. So I've had to do the work to get past that. I'm very aware of my of my attachment style. Mostly because of my background and growing up and things. So I know what my attachment style is. So I've learned to kind of work with that and balance that. But I mean, there was an incident, I would say about a year or so ago, where there was a breakdown, I'm going to say, in communication. Where my partner was out with someone, and the expectation, I was doing something else, so I was actually out myself. But in the conversations and everything beforehand, the expectation was that she would be home when I got home, and that's not a rule. It's not a thing. It was just that was what was going to happen that particular night. Was she was going to be home when I got there, and she wasn't, and she wasn't answering her phone. There was nothing, there was no communication. And for me, that was extraordinarily triggering. And because based on previous relationships, that meant nothing good was going on, and I figured I knew where she was, but also I didn't. And, so it was, my brain started racing and I was not okay with that. And that had been in sort of the second time that there was a breakdown in communication regarding this one particular person that she had been out with. And at that point I was like, I'm not sure how I feel about this situation. But that was sort of a one-off. And we talked about it and we worked through it. It was a rough few days. Like it legitimately was, because I was dealing with shit, which then triggered her shit. And it was, everybody was triggered. Everybody was, everybody was dealing with shit. But we managed to work through it. We talked through it, and but like I said, that was sort of a one-off. There hasn't really been an issue with anybody since. She's brought people that she was, dating or potential dates or whatever to my shows or to my sex trivia or to whatever. No big deal. She's been out a few times with a friend. They're kind of taking it to the next level. And I'm like, great, have a good time. I don't care. Like, so while I've tried to make it a point and done the self-work to kind of avoid the jealousy issues, that's not to say that it won't happen, because it happens. And anybody that says, that's like, well, if you're poly or whatever, you can't get jealous. No, that's not how that works. You still have all the emotions that a person has. They just
exactly
right. Just because you're poly doesn't make all of a sudden, everything go poof and hey, everything disappears. That's not how that works.
Right. No, it almost does the opposite, right? It almost shines a spotlight on, here's some cracks that you need to work on and some dysfunction over here that we need to work on as well.
But the key is working on them. The key is working on them.
Exactly. I 100% agree. So I honor that you have done your own self-work in terms of figuring out what is my attachment style, how can I work on that? So that's really beautiful and an example of somebody doing the work. And, over the course of your life, there's just been, all the different things that you've been talking about just takes so much courage, it takes a lot of vulnerability. So, thank you for just, again, sharing your story to inspire other people from everything that you've walked yourself through with a lot of pride and tenacity. So thank you for that. And I'd love to just maybe ask where would you say you are at now currently on your journey? And maybe then we can kind of walk a little bit more into the work that you're doing today that you're really proud of.
Ooh, where am I at in my journey? Trying to maneuver around being in my mid 40s.
I'm 54, so I get it.
it's all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, I'm legitimately middle aged. I don't know what to do with this. Yeah. Like I said, we are, my partner and I are non-monogamous. We dabble in kink and all these things, but again, because I am definitely more of an introvert than she is, I struggle with meeting people. For a few different reasons. Number one, I'm an introvert, so meeting people means a lot of effort, which sometimes I'm like, I really don't have the effort. It's just like, this is cool. Can we just skip all of this and can we get past? No, we can't get past. Okay, fine. We have to start from the beginning. It's hard. And another, I guess another sort of struggle that I'm finding as far as navigating, being non-monogamous is that I am pansexual. So when it comes to meeting men, that can be difficult as a trans individual. Particularly when it comes to any sort of, cis men, because there's sort of an ingrained misogyny that comes with certain things. And, I have to constantly explain to people, okay, I'm not submissive. I'm also not technically a bottom. I'm verse, but just because I have bits and pieces in certain parts doesn't mean that, I think that there is a tendency for people, but cisgender men in particular, to equate vagina with submission. And because that's just how they were, that's what society says. You have female bits, so therefore you must be this. And I'm neither submissive nor a bottom. I'm a verse top, and that proves difficult. There are, a lot of men see me sort of as a, bingo card kind of thing, where it's like, hey, I've never tried this, but it's like, oh. I am not an ice cream flavor. Like that's not you don't get to try it. That's not how this works. And sometimes dealing with that is exhausting. So I just kind of don't, but having navigated and continuing to navigate all of these different things makes it great in terms of educational purposes, because that's what I do in a lot of aspects of my life is educate.
And speaking of education, there was a word I'm not too familiar with. You mentioned the word verse. I'm not sure what that means. Do you mind sharing that?
Sure. So so in the kink world, right, you have tops, bottoms, and switches, or dominant submissives and switches. When you're talking about like sexual positions, which usually if I'm talking about the kink world, I will use like dom, sub, and switch. If I'm talking about sexual positions, I will use top, bottom, and verse. So being versatile means that you're fine giving or receiving when it comes to sexual positions.
Oh, okay. I've never heard that before.
So it is not the same as a switch, and it's definitely not used in terms of like power dynamics. It's used almost exclusively when it comes to like sexual positions and that kind of thing.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. I really learned something today, besides learning about you and your journey. So how about in terms of your work? Tell whatever you'd like to share. Is there any upcoming workshops or things, if you want to just touch a little bit on the one that I went to, how to be a trans ally, whatever you'd like to share about your work?
So I'm lucky in that my muggle job is boring as hell. So I get to, and I have a lot of like downtime. So I get to kind of branch off and do a lot of things. I say that my muggle job feeds my face, where the stuff that I do outside of it feeds my soul. And that
I like that.
That's I hate my job, but the perks are nice. But my colleague Michael and I, we kind of put together the How to Be a Trans Ally workshops because there was a need for it. There are other, we've seen some other trainings and things out there. And we knew that locally here, we needed something because there wasn't anything really like that out here. So we created the How to Be a Trans Ally, from allies to accomplices, leaping into action. And then what we actually presented at the Southwest Love Fest, which was How to Be a Trans Ally in Bed, which is very similar to the How to Be a Trans Ally, but geared a little bit more towards like the sexy time and things like that, which is needed as well, because you can be a trans ally and not know how to navigate things when it comes to, oh God, now I have to get naked with this person. What the fuck am I doing? So being able to bring our experiences and be able to talk about that sort of thing. And, every time we've done it, whether it was virtually or at an in-person conference or something, we always have people that come up and they're like, thank you so much for that. That was so needed. I didn't know how to deal with this, or I wasn't sure how to approach this, or, so we know that we're doing good things. As far as like upcoming conferences, I don't think we have anything on the books, but so here in Arizona, I've been doing a live webcast. We're currently on summer hiatus. We'll be back in October, but it's called Let's Have a Fefe, and it's myself and a local drag queen. And we've been doing it for 10 years. We just wrapped up our 11th season. And one of the segments on it is my Just the Tip. And that segment is kind of what it kind of caused a whole bunch of other things to expand. One of them being the Trans Ally workshops and all that. But the segment is me talking about everything you can possibly imagine and trying to educate our audience, from kink to being poly to trans stuff to STIs to everything you could possibly imagine, from relationships to sex to gender shit to whatever. And that has been something that over the last 10 years, every week when we do it, someone's like, I didn't know that. That was fantastic. Thank you for teaching me this. Thank you. So I'm big on education. One of the things that I do up here in Phoenix is a sex trivia night. It's actually myself and the queen that we do, Let's Have a Fefe, like we co-host it. And we do it once a month, and it is legitimately educational. And our crowd keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we do it like Jeopardy style. So we have categories, everything from kink to LGBTQ history to just sexual history in general to middle school sex ed, which that is our hardest category. No one ever gets those right. It's sex ed questions taken from middle school curriculum, and nobody gets them right.
Wow.
We just added a pop culture one. We're going to add a presidential scandals category. And it's really educational. We don't just run through the questions, but I will stop and I will educate and I will explain why, this is a microaggression, or, why this is a problem, or why these sex toys are not body safe, and, and things like that. And, I had a friend who came for the first time a couple months ago, and he came up afterward. He was like, this was really awesome, but the second you stopped to educate, like, that blew my fucking mind, and I was hooked. So wow. That's that. I almost everything I do, just because of who I am, I try to educate. And that actually comes back to the privilege. I have the privilege to be able to live out.
Yeah.
And so I use that for, my own benefit, really, to be able to be like, no, actually, this is why this is a problem, so I do my best to continue to be out and use that to be able to educate on everything from being poly to kink to being trans to you name it. If I can talk about it, I will.
Awesome. Good for you. Well, I'm so delighted to have you come on here and share your story and everything that you have educated us with. So with that, I'd love to take you into the lightning round, and then we can start to wrap up our interviews. That sound good?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Do it.
Okay. So the lightning round is just a couple excellent questions just to round off our show. And the first is, what would you say is maybe one of the best things that you've done along your journey to live your most authentic life?
Do the self-work. Whatever that means to you, whether it's therapy, whether it's reading books, whatever it is, do the self-work. And when it comes to living authentically, remembering that it's not about everybody else, it's about you.
I love that. Yeah, just like kind of tuning everything else out, so you kind of tune out the noise. Definitely hear that. How about if somebody was to come to you and say, what advice would you share with somebody who's maybe either they're about to start exploring ethical non-monogamy or stepping into their most authentic life? What advice would you give them outside of what you just shared there? If maybe they're at the very beginning of that journey.
Do your research. There's a lot of resources out there. Talk to people. Don't just be like, I'm going to be ethically non-monogamous with my wife and we're looking for a third. And we want to, it's like, like, just be, you can tell the people that have not done any of the work or the research or really talked to anybody. They just decided, spur of the moment, me and my wife, we're going to go ahead and we're going to be non-monogamous and we're going to be open. And we'd really like to have a woman female to join us. It's like, cringe,
right.
stop. It's like, stop. Before you may had that discussion that you want to be, non-monogamous, whatever that means to you, whether it's swinging, whether it's just being open, whether it's, whatever that means to you, you need to do your research. Mm-hmm. Plain and simple. Even when it comes to things like transitioning, there are, whatever it is, whether it's kink, doesn't matter. You have to do your research, because it's more than just like, oh, I'm kinky, I'm going to go get a paddle and beat the shit out of people. Nope. That's not how that works.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful advice. How about, is there a book or a movie or a resource that you can recommend that maybe helped you along your journey of living your most authentic life that you can share?
Oh, geez. It depends on the aspect of my life that we're talking about. There are so many things. I'm going to say, when it comes specifically to being poly, because that seems to be the thing that folks do little to no research on. The book Polysecure by Jessica Fern, mm-hmm. that is, well, it's great for being, poly and ethically non-monogamous. It'll actually help you in all sorts of aspects of your life, because it deals with attachment styles and understanding your attachment style and why maybe you kind of do the things that you do. And, ways to be able to understand and work with your attachment style, because like my attachment style, I have an avoidant attachment style. It can be awful, but learning that, okay, this is how I know that I operate. So I know that if I am confronted with some sort of conflict or something, that my instinct is to do this. So instead, what I need to do is I need to think a minute, take a breath, and then be able to actually communicate better instead of just shutting down and retreating. And it's been helpful with all sorts of things. But that is, for me, that book is probably one of the better ones out there as far as learning yourself and how to bring other people into that bubble of yours.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, it's a great book. I can't recommend it enough. So I'm glad that you shared it too. And then lastly, for fun, what is a particular song or music that really moves you or inspires you?
I am a 90s kid. So generally, like, if I am in my car, or even if I'm just working around the house, or if I'm in the pool, like, I almost always have the 90s station on. And I guess it's about nostalgia, I guess, really. It reminds me of, school dances, going to the clubs, and I will almost always know every word to every song, which is probably why I can't remember what I had for breakfast, because my brain is full of 90s lyrics. But it's, you want me to get up and put me in a good mood, I am just throw on a 90s station and I'm jamming, I'm dancing, I'm doing all the things. And it's just, mm-hmm. just because it's fun. It was one of the better eras for music, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's funny. Around here, we have our Alexa, and that's one of the stations we'll usually put on some 90s music, Alexa. So that's awesome. Well, Jace, thank you so much for the beautiful work that you're doing, for sharing your courageous and amazing story, and for being here with me on the show. So thanks for your time.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love that you do this, and it's another outlet for folks to be able to, share their story and share their experiences, because, you never know who something is going to resonate with. Exactly. You're going to have that one person that listens to, that randomly finds the podcast on Spotify or whatever, and they happen to get that one episode and they're like, oh, wow, like light bulbs and everything. So I appreciate you, having a platform for folks to be able to come and talk and share their stories.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships, while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.